Our gospel reading can be found on page 790 of your Pew Bible if you would like to follow along. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 9th chapter, verses 27 through 31. As Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying loudly, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" They said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their eyes were opened. Then Jesus sternly ordered them, "See that no one knows of this." But they went away and spread the news about him throughout that district. This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. And at this time, I'd like to call on Dr. Brian Bunkers to come and to share with us.
Yep. Thank you, Pastor Todd. When Pastor Todd first asked me to do this, I think I probably responded back within 30 seconds. Blending faith with my day job has always been a keen interest for me, and I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to come and share some thoughts with you here at Trinity. So the topic for this Lenten season is scarred, a common word, one we have all heard and used many times in our life. I'd bet that when you hear this word, you conjure up a mental image of what this means. Today, we are going to look more deeply into the physical scars we carry and their relationship to faith during this Lenten season. So what is a scar? As a doctor, I would describe this as an area of fibrous tissue that replaces normal skin after an injury. Scars result from the biological process of wound repair to the skin, as well as to other organs and tissues of the body. Thus, scarring is a natural part of the healing process. But to develop a scar, there must first be a wound, an injury, or a disease present. In my world, that can include things like a broken bone that we cast and then mend, or a cut that requires stitches to hold the edges together while the body does its magic. But some wounds are deeper, and not all are visible. Think of a person with cancer of an internal organ. When we see this person, we may have no visual clue that they have a serious illness that is causing a scar on their internal organs. It has been my experience that many emotions can accompany these physical scars. Emotions like fear and anxiety can accompany the physical pain that cancer patients must endure. Emotions like sadness, anger, and disappointment can be seen in an athlete who finds out their senior season has ended prematurely due to a torn knee ligament. It can be a sobering time for many who felt that they were in control of their life, and when this wound occurs, they now find themselves with a loss of control. Lent is a time of woundedness as well. On Good Friday, we will gather together as Christians to worship and honor the suffering and scarring that Jesus endured on the road to Calvary and his eventual death by crucifixion on the cross. When I create a mental image of Jesus' physical suffering, I can only think of how excruciating that pain must have been for him and the corresponding emotions accompanying those wounds that he and his followers felt. Do you think that they experienced emotions of fear, of sadness, of loss of control? You bet they did. But what follows the wound or injury is the opportunity to heal. So let's shift our focus to the healing process. What elements are required to heal? From a physical standpoint, in our example of a cut to the skin, it takes good blood flow, protein from our diet, and a clean environment or the removal of any toxins or dead tissue from the wound. But I would argue that for many large or serious wounds or diseases, it takes something else. It takes faith. How many times have you heard a doctor tell a patient that they are 100% certain of the outcome of their illness? We might be able to predict as high as 99%, but never 100. It is that last few percent that relies on faith to heal us. In my experience, spirituality is tied to the healing process. For me, faith and healing are interconnected. Let me share with you a personal story. I know many of you, and many of you know me. My wife, Carrie, and I have lived in Owatonna for the past 28 years, and this has been the only place that I have ever practiced medicine after completing my training. Our marriage has been blessed through adoption by 3 beautiful children: Nathan, now 25, Mariana, now 23, and Luke, now 21. It was 2 years ago when our daughter Mari called home to tell us that she was sick. She had what sounded like influenza, and when she continued with her symptoms, we encouraged her to go into the student health service at the University of Missouri, where she was a student. She did, and indeed, they diagnosed her with influenza and recommended rest and symptomatic care. Her mother kept close tabs on her, but 1 week later, Mari called me at work on a Friday morning. I certainly thought that was odd, because the only time Mari ever called me was when she was having trouble with her car. And I thought, well, what the heck? You should be in class. Why are you driving your car? We greeted each other, and I said, "Hey, Mar, what's up?" And she says, "Well, Dad, is it normal for me to feel short of breath walking across campus?" And I said, "Well, Mari, I don't think that's normal for you. And if you're continuing to not feel well, perhaps you should go back to the clinic and be checked out again." We made an agreement that if she weren't feeling better by Monday, she would go back in. Mari never made it to Monday. On Sunday, we got a phone call and the voice on the other end was one of Mari's friends telling her that she was in the emergency room at the University of Missouri Hospital. The doctors wanted to admit her to the intensive care unit. Our youngest son, Luke, and I were at a soccer game when the call came, and of course, a snowstorm was on the way. I talked to Carrie and we made a plan. She would leave right away to be with Mari, and then, if needed, I would come the following day after the storm had passed. Mari had developed a condition called ARDS, which stands for Acute Respiratory Distress Syndrome. This is a condition where the body, in its attempt to fight off the disease, goes overboard and actually damages itself, and the results were her lungs were filling with fluid. She had increased trouble to breathe, and her oxygen levels were falling. Carrie arrived just before the doctors put her on the ventilator or breathing machine and into a medically induced coma. Fear filled us all, and her last words to her mother were, "Please tell me that everything will be okay." I drove down the next morning and could not help but wonder if she would be alive or dead when I finally arrived. I realized I was not in control. I did the only thing that I knew how to do. I prayed. For 7 hours in my car, I prayed. Is this how Mary, the mother of Jesus, must have felt? Mari was alive when I arrived, but hardly stable. After 5 days there, her condition continued to deteriorate. It was decided to transfer her by air ambulance to Mayo. It was a harrowing time. Any little thing that didn't go just right could have a catastrophic consequence. Fortunately, the transfer did go well, and we settled into our new routine. Carrie took a leave from her job and was with Mari all day, and I would come and spend the nights. and continued to work during the day. Each morning, I would start out at 6 a.m. by a visit to the chapel to pray to God for healing of our daughter. I prayed hard for healing, and so did many of you. In fact, we felt embraced by the entire community. Our friends took over our home, walked the dogs, brought over food, and provided comfort. As I tried to continue to take care of my own patients, a most amazing thing happened. During my encounter, roughly 80% of the patients I was seeing asked me about my daughter and told me that they were praying for her or were on their church's prayer chain. One patient even shared with me a vision that he had had about her getting better. I had no idea that so many people cared. It was overwhelming. Unfortunately, Mari's condition continued to deteriorate, and she ended up on the next step of therapy, which is called ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. We might think of that as the heart-lung bypass machine. The stakes were very high right now, and the outcome uncertain. Uncertain to the point that we had to consult with the lung transplant team. The 5-year survival for a lung transplant is 50%, a roll of the dice with your child's life. Then, during the Lenten season in 2017, with Easter on the horizon, and with all of the hope of new life that Easter brings, she started to get better. After 2 long months, and through the power of prayer and fantastic medical care, she healed her wounded lungs, and today she only has small residual lung scarring. For Carrie and I, this was a miracle. Our scripture reference today is from Matthew's Gospel, where he describes the encounter where Jesus heals the blind man. When the man expresses his thanks to Jesus for healing him, Jesus responds back that it is your faith that has healed you. Medical science describes the work of God, but it is only when our faith is added to that equation that true healing happens. That faith is what we celebrate and share during this Lenten season. I've used that term wounded several times in this message. Certainly, Mari's lungs were very wounded and still carry some residual scar. But what about Carrie and I, her brothers, Nate and Luke, other family members and friends? Were we wounded in our own way by this illness? I think we were. It will always be there, and I think about it often. In the back of my conscious thought is a comment that one of our doctor friends in Rochester made to us after the event was all over. He told us that they expected that Mari would die. But we also know that this experience and the scars it left behind do not define us as people or a family. In fact, it has brought our family closer together, and we certainly don't take each other for granted like we used to. We are defined by the love we have for each other, as well as the love that we felt from our families, our friends, and from you, members of this community who prayed along with us. That love that does define us comes from God, who ultimately heals us all.